I realized she had already left me the moment she looked at me and said, "I checked out a long time ago." No anger, no shame, just calm honesty, like she was explaining a scheduling issue, not the end of our marriage. I remember standing there, waiting for something, guilt, hesitation, a crack in her voice, but nothing came. She didn't look conflicted. She looked relieved. That's when it hit me. I wasn't discovering a betrayal in real time. I was being informed of a decision she had made months, maybe years ago. When I asked how she could do this, how she could betray us, she shrugged and said, "It didn't feel like cheating." I was already gone. Those words landed harder than any confession. Because in that moment, I understood that the affair wasn't the beginning of the end. It was just the evidence. The marriage I thought I was fighting for had already been abandoned, quietly, emotionally, without my consent. I was arguing with someone who had already moved on, and she felt no guilt because, in her mind, there was nothing left to betray. Before the distance, our marriage looked solid from the outside. We had routines, shared responsibilities, inside jokes that had survived years together. We paid bills, planned holidays, talked about the future in vague but comforting ways. I thought stability meant safety. I thought consistency meant commitment. Looking back, I realize I confused familiarity with intimacy. We weren't fighting. That was the part that fooled me. No screaming matches, no obvious cracks. Just a quiet rhythm that felt mature. We showed up to events together, posted normal photos, played our roles well. I believed that love evolved into something calmer, less intense, and that what we had was normal adulthood. What I didn't see was how one-sided it had become. I was maintaining the connection, checking in, initiating conversations, trying to keep us emotionally aligned. She was present, but passive, agreeable, but distant. I thought we were building something stable. In reality, she was slowly disengaging, and I was the only one still emotionally invested in keeping the marriage alive. The changes were small enough to dismiss, which is exactly why I ignored them. Her phone became more important than any conversation we were having. She'd tilt the screen away without thinking, smile at messages she didn't explain, suddenly need privacy she never cared about before. When I asked who she was talking to, she'd say, "Just friends," like the question itself was annoying. She stopped sharing details about her day, not in a dramatic way, just fewer specifics, fewer emotions. Stories became summaries. Feelings became facts. I noticed she laughed less with me and more at things I wasn't part of. When I reached for her, she didn't pull away, but she didn't lean in either. There was a pause where there used to be warmth. I told myself this was normal. Stress, work, phases people go through in long marriages. I convinced myself that noticing these things meant I was overthinking. What I didn't understand then was that emotional withdrawal doesn't announce itself loudly. It shows up quietly, in 100 small ways, until distance feels normal and connection feels like effort. There were moments that should have stopped me cold, but I kept finding ways to explain them away. She started guarding her schedule like it was classified information. Late meetings that didn't exist before. Work dinners with people I'd never heard of. If plans changed suddenly, she acted irritated that I even noticed. I told myself I was being controlling for questioning it. Her behavior around me shifted in subtle but telling ways. Compliments disappeared. Physical affection became something I initiated and she tolerated. When I tried to talk about us, she'd sigh, look tired, and say things like, "Can we not do this right now?" as if caring was inconvenient. Somehow, I accepted that framing. The biggest red flag was how easily she dismissed my feelings. If I said something felt off, she'd respond calmly, almost rehearsed. "You're reading too much into things. You're insecure lately. Nothing is wrong." She never got defensive, she got dismissive. That should have scared me more than anger ever could. I rewrote these moments in my head to protect the marriage. I chose comfort over clarity. Looking back, the red flags weren't hidden at all. I just kept lowering my standards for what love was supposed to feel like, because admitting the truth felt worse than lying to myself. The first moment something truly felt wrong wasn't dramatic. There was no fight, no discovery, no clear proof. It was a quiet realization that hit me in the middle of an ordinary evening. We were sitting on the couch, both scrolling on our phones, the TV on but ignored. I looked over at her and felt like I was sitting next to a stranger. I tried to start a simple conversation. Nothing serious, just something about my day. She nodded without looking up, gave short responses, never asked anything back. At one point, she smiled at her phone, a real smile, the kind I hadn't seen directed at me in a long time. When I asked what was funny, she said, "Nothing," too quickly, and went silent. That's when my stomach dropped. Not because I knew anything for sure, but because I felt invisible. I realized I could disappear from that room and nothing would change. No curiosity, no concern, no emotional presence. I remember lying in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, replaying that moment over and over. I told myself I was tired, stressed, paranoid. But deep down, a quiet thought wouldn't go away. People don't drift this far unless they're already leaning towards something or someone else. Her language changed before her behavior fully did, and that's what I didn't understand at the time. The words she used became softer, emptier, carefully neutral. "I don't know," replaced real answers. "It's not a big deal," shut down conversations before they started. Anything emotional was minimized, flattened, stripped of weight. When I talked about feeling disconnected, she didn't argue. She reframed. "You're just stressed. You're projecting. You always overthink things." She spoke like someone explaining something obvious to a child, calm and patient, as if my feelings were a misunderstanding she needed to correct. There was no curiosity about why I felt that way, just dismissal. Even the way she said, "I love you," changed. It became automatic, said while doing something else, never followed by warmth. Sometimes she wouldn't say it back at all, and when I noticed, she'd say, "Of course I love you," like the question itself was unreasonable. Her words stopped building connection and started creating distance. They weren't cruel, they were indifferent. And that was worse. Because indifference doesn't argue, doesn't explain, doesn't fight. It quietly prepares the ground for leaving while making you feel foolish for noticing. The emotional distance didn't start with another man. It started with her slowly checking out of us. She was physically present but emotionally unavailable, like her body showed up while her attention lived somewhere else. Conversations felt transactional. We talked about schedules, bills, logistics, never feelings, never us. She stopped coming to me with problems or ideas. Anything personal stayed locked inside her phone or her own head. When something good happened, I wasn't the first person she told anymore. I felt it in the pauses, in the lack of enthusiasm, in how she no longer reached for me without being prompted. At night, she'd turn away in bed, scrolling until she fell asleep. If I tried to pull her closer, she'd sigh, not angrily, just tired. That sigh did more damage than any argument could have. It told me I was a burden, not a partner. I kept telling myself this was just a phase, that long marriages have quiet seasons. What I didn't want to admit was that emotional intimacy had already been replaced. By the time the affair actually began, she hadn't betrayed a connection. We had already lost it. The cheating didn't create the distance. It just made it undeniable. The lies weren't dramatic or elaborate. That's what made them unsettling. They were small, casual, delivered without hesitation, and they never quite lined up. She'd say she was working late, but I'd see her active online at odd hours that didn't match her schedule. She'd mention running into someone, then later claim she hadn't left the house that day. When I asked follow-up questions, her answers shifted slightly, just enough to feel wrong. What bothered me most was how easily she told them. No nerves. No slips, just smooth explanations that ended with me feeling foolish for even asking. If I pointed out inconsistencies, she'd smile and say, "Why are you interrogating me?" as if logic itself was an attack. I started second-guessing my own memory. Maybe I misheard. Maybe I misunderstood. Maybe I was connecting dots that weren't there. That was the trap. The lies weren't meant to convince me of the truth. They were meant to exhaust me into silence. Eventually, I realized something important. Honest people try to clarify when things don't add up. She didn't. She just wanted the conversation to stop. And that was when I understood that whatever she was hiding mattered more to her than how confused or hurt I felt. I didn't discover the emotional cheating all at once. It came together in fragments, and that almost made it worse. A name that appeared too often. A tone in her messages that didn't sound like friendship. Inside jokes I wasn't part of. Energy she no longer gave to me, poured freely into someone else. One night, while she was in the shower, her phone lit up on the nightstand. I wasn't looking for anything. I just saw the notification preview. His name. A message that said, "I miss talking to you like this." My chest tightened in a way I can still feel when I think about it. I scrolled. Not far. I didn't need to. There was no explicit sex, no plans to meet, just intimacy, validation, emotional dependence. She talked to him about her fears, her dreams, her frustrations with me, things I thought belonged to our marriage. She sounded lighter with him, more alive. When I confronted her later, she didn't deny it. She shrugged and said, "It's just emotional. Nothing happened." That was the moment I realized how far apart we were. She had already crossed a line in her mind, and the fact that I was bleeding on the other side of it didn't seem to matter at all. I found out about the physical cheating the way people usually do, by accident, when the lies finally collapsed under their own weight. A receipt she forgot to throw away. A hotel charge in a city she claimed she'd never been to. When I asked about it, she paused for half a second too long. That pause told me everything. She didn't confess right away. She tried to reframe it first. Said I was jumping to conclusions. Said it was complicated. But when I asked her to look me in the eye and tell me nothing physical had happened, she couldn't. Her silence felt heavier than any words. Eventually, she admitted it. Not emotionally. Not tearfully. Just facts. Yes, it happened. More than once. No, it wasn't planned at first. Yes, it just evolved. She spoke like she was explaining a scheduling mistake, not the destruction of our marriage. What broke me wasn't the image of them together. It was how casually she talked about it. No shaking voice. No shame. No urgency to fix anything. Just a calm acceptance, like this was an outcome she'd already processed and moved past. That's when I understood something painful. The physical cheating didn't begin when they touched. It began long before, when she stopped seeing me as someone she owed honesty, loyalty, or care. By the time I learned the truth, she was already emotionally gone, and the body had simply followed. The confrontation wasn't loud. There was no shouting, no slammed doors. I sat across from her at the kitchen table, everything already laid out between us, what I knew, what I'd seen, what she'd admitted in pieces. I asked her one simple question. Why? She leaned back, arms crossed, and looked at me like I was asking something unreasonable. She said she'd already explained herself, that it just happened, that I was focusing too much on details that didn't matter anymore. When I told her how much it hurt, how betrayed I felt, she sighed and said, "You're making this bigger than it needs to be." I waited for remorse, for panic, for fear of losing me. None of it came. She wasn't defensive. She was detached, calm, almost bored. When I asked if she felt guilty, she paused, then said, "I don't see the point of feeling bad about something that's already done." That was the moment the room went quiet in my head. I realized I wasn't confronting someone who made a mistake. I was confronting someone who had already justified leaving, and just needed me to catch up. What stunned me wasn't what she did. It was how little she felt about it. She didn't apologize unless I pushed, and even then the words sounded hollow, like something she'd learned was expected to say. "I'm sorry you're hurt," she told me once, carefully avoiding responsibility. "Not sorry I did this. Just sorry for the inconvenience of my pain." She explained her actions like a conclusion she'd already reached. She said she'd been unhappy for a long time, that the connection was already gone, that what she did didn't change anything. It just reflected the truth. When I asked how she could do this without remorse, she looked genuinely confused and said, "What do you want me to do? Punish myself forever?" There was no urgency to fix things, no fear of losing the marriage, no recognition that she'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. She spoke about loyalty like it was optional, empathy like it was outdated. And in that moment, I understood something devastating. Guilt wasn't missing because she was in shock. It was missing because she'd already emotionally left, and you don't feel guilty about hurting someone you no longer see as yours. That realization hurt more than the cheating itself. Because affairs can end, regret can heal. But when someone looks at your pain and feels nothing, that's not betrayal. That's abandonment. I held it together for as long as I could. I stayed calm during the conversations. I asked questions. I listened. I tried to be rational. And then, one night, it all collapsed at once. Not in front of her, alone, in the dark, sitting on the edge of the bed that no longer felt like ours. My body reacted before my mind could keep up. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight, my hands were shaking, and my thoughts kept looping back to the same realization. She knew this would destroy me, and she did it anyway. I replayed every moment, every lie, every time I doubted myself instead of trusting my instincts. What broke me wasn't just losing her. It was losing the version of reality I thought I was living in. The marriage I believed in didn't exist anymore, and maybe it hadn't for a long time. I felt stupid for fighting for something she had already let die. I felt small for begging for empathy from someone who no longer had any for me. That was the lowest point. Not anger, not rage, just grief so heavy it made it hard to move. And in that emptiness, something quietly shifted. I realized I couldn't heal while still chasing someone who felt nothing about breaking me. The decision to stop chasing her didn't come with confidence or strength. It came with exhaustion. I woke up one morning and realized I had no energy left to convince someone to care. Every conversation felt like I was arguing for my own worth, explaining why betrayal should matter, why loyalty wasn't optional. I was tired of auditioning for a role I already had. I noticed the pattern clearly then. I was the only one asking questions, the only one trying to understand, the only one trying to fix something she had already written off. Each time I reached out emotionally, I got the same blank response, calm, detached, unmoved. Chasing her wasn't love anymore. It was self-abandonment. So I stopped explaining my pain. I stopped asking for reassurance. I stopped hoping she'd suddenly wake up and feel remorse. And the moment I did, something unexpected happened, clarity. The fog lifted. I saw that my dignity mattered more than her indifference. Letting go wasn't about punishment or revenge. It was about survival. I understood that staying in a dynamic where someone feels no guilt for hurting you will slowly erase you. Stopping the chase was the first time I chose myself instead of begging someone else to choose me. Once I stopped chasing her, the distance between us stopped feeling painful and started feeling honest. I pulled back emotionally, not to provoke a reaction, but because I finally accepted the truth. There was nothing left to fight for. She noticed the change, but it didn't scare her. There was no urgency, no sudden regret, just indifference. And that told me everything I needed to know. We lived side by side like roommates, careful and detached. Conversations became brief and practical. No tension, no warmth. In that quiet, I realized she hadn't left me suddenly. She'd been gone for a long time. The emotional withdrawal, the lack of guilt, the calm explanations weren't reactions. They were proof she had already made peace with losing me. That's the lesson I carry now. When someone cheats and feels no guilt, believe them. Don't wait for remorse. Don't chase closure. Remorse matters more than explanations, because explanations can lie, guilt doesn't. Love without empathy is emotional abandonment. Cheating hurts, but cheating without guilt is the final betrayal. And self-respect begins the moment you stop begging someone to care who already chose not to.